Good morning, everyone, or indeed good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you are in the world and where you are joining us from. It's a pleasure to welcome you to this live Q&A for people interested in postgraduate research study in the arts and humanities here at the University of Glasgow. We're really glad to have you with us. I'll do some brief introductions. My name is Professor Bryony Randall. I am a professor of Modernist literature, which is my academic specialism, but I'm here in my capacity of Dean of Graduate Studies in the College of Arts. And what that means is that I am the academic lead for our community of about 500 postgraduate research students across all the disciplines in the arts and humanities here at the university. I'm going to be able to answer some questions that you might have about processes, about structures, about big picture PGR experiences. But I'm joined by two people who have a much more granular and coalface experience of PGR study, and I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves in turn. So I'm going to ask Giuseppe and then Jessica just to say who you are and a little bit about where you are on the PGR journey so far. So over to you, Giuseppe.
Thank you very much, Barney. Well, good morning, everybody. I am Giuseppe Celico, and I'm in the very last month of my doctorate. It's very exciting times. I am doing a PhD in medieval history, looking at the engagement of women in Milanese society in 12th, 13th century Milan. And I've been doing my PhD now for 3.5 years, a bit more than that. So it's been a long time.
Just long enough, right? It's great to have you with us, Giuseppe. And Jessica.
Yep. Hi, everyone. My name is Jessica Leeper, and I just submitted my thesis last month, so that is a big excitement and a relief. My background is also in medieval history, but I do Gregory of Tours, so 6th century, and with an interdisciplinary approach in the cognitive science of religion.
Amazing. So we do have two medieval historians with us. Just as it happens, we obviously study a range of different subject areas at the university. So please do add in any questions, comments or thoughts that you'd like to ask us as we continue the conversation. So Jessica and Giuseppe are really well placed to answer questions about the PhD experience, having just submitted or be close to submission, which is fantastic. But what I want to do is take them back to way back, a little while back, and thinking about what led them to apply for the PhD at Glasgow, because obviously we'll have people joining us on the recording who maybe have applied, maybe they have an offer, or maybe they're just thinking about postgraduate research study and starting to formulate ideas for a project. So again, maybe I'll start with Giuseppe to ask us to say a little bit about what led you to apply for the PhD at Glasgow.
For sure. So it's a relatively longer story than just a PhD, because I did my undergraduate and my master's here as well. So I had a long Glasgow experience beforehand, which means I had quite a good network of people inside university, both as friends and support network, but also, my supervisor, I worked with him since my undergraduate thesis and then a master thesis. And so basically it was quite a natural transition to ask him, should we do a PhD together? How would that look like? And so I did that back in 2018 and started the application process and being successful, and I stayed here.
Fantastic. So yeah, it's often the case, isn't it, that if you've already formulated a relationship with a supervisor, that then leads you on to develop a project. But of course, it's for some people, they're coming in from other institutions, and we have a real mix of people coming from undergraduate and master study all over the world. Jessica, do you want to tell us a bit about your process?
Yes. So for me, I had actually also did my master's at Glasgow, and during my master's as postgraduate taught courses, I was an early modernist, but I had taken a course with which now is my two supervisors and converted to a medievalist because one of them offered the cognitive science of religion, which is something that I was really interested in pursuing. And I think that's about how my journey has started.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting, that, isn't it? And I think that's a pattern that people experience, is that you'll have an idea for a project, you might have something that's developed from your master's, but it can really evolve even in the process of talking about the project with prospective supervisors, and certainly over the course of the PhD, it is an organically moving beast. I've seen that we've got a question from someone in the chat. Thanks for your question. Who's saying that we can have 2 PhD supervisors. In fact, you must have 2 PhD supervisors. So at the University of Glasgow, everyone has 2 supervisors, which ensures kind of robust supervision, a range of different perspectives. Some people even have 3. The question is if it's possible to get them from 2 different colleges. It is possible. It's relatively unusual, but we are certainly very open to projects which are interdisciplinary and which draw on disciplines that might move beyond arts and humanities. It's very much to be driven by what combination of supervisory expertise will really support your project. So in principle, that yes, I think the really important thing to think about is when you are formulating your idea for your project and you want to explore the possibility of studying it at Glasgow, to get in touch with supervisors. And there's a find a supervisor form on the university website, so that you can start getting a sense of who's around, who has the right expertise, and they may well have excellent suggestions of who might be good co-supervisors for your project. I don't know, Jessica, I mean, I know your project has as you've described, an interdisciplinary element. So I don't know if you can say a bit about your experience of kind of interdisciplinary working.
So the thing is with my interdisciplinary approach, the supervisor was actually a historian who had found an interest and had published on CSR. But I do have colleagues who have gone from like history to information studies and in other areas. So I know it is very common to have different colleges to work with, and social sciences as well. I believe one of my supervisors also has a student who's in the social sciences.
Yeah, exactly. It's definitely something that we're keen to support interdisciplinary projects where that's needed.
Maybe a thought on that. So slightly connected, because I know maybe not at college, but different universities, I think as well. SACS especially encourages the Scottish College School of Arts and Humanities encourages multi-university supervision, and that's not quite the same as different colleges, but it touches upon it. It really is. It means, and I myself, I was supervisor from Edinburgh. My secondary supervisor from Edinburgh. My main one is from Glasgow, and so that's something maybe you can look into it as well. Maybe it's not a different college, but it provides a different perspective on the thesis itself.
That's really that's really interesting to know. So that means that, Giuseppe, you're so just to explicate that for people who might not be familiar. So the main UK funding body for postgraduate research in the arts and humanities is called for Glasgow, for Glasgow students, it's the Scottish Graduate School for the Arts and Humanities, and this covers the whole of Scotland. And funding, it's competitive. So excellent work, Giuseppe. So funding is there's a funding round that happens each year. It is a relatively small number of people who get that funding, but it is exactly right that because the Scottish Graduate School for the Arts and Humanities conceives of as a collective of institutions, they really encourage students to think about or supervisors to set up supervisory teams that are from more than one institution, so that you've got the very best supervision from across the whole of Scotland. How's that worked for you, Giuseppe? Have you found that useful?
It's been very useful for 2 main reasons. Firstly, is of course great to have a secondary supervisor, because it gives you that your main one maybe or something, then you have a different help. But it's been helpful for extending the network of people. I've met a lot of friends in Edinburgh. I actually have a friend that does this, his main supervisor in Edinburgh and a secondary in Glasgow. So I have this like almost parallel connection there. And like I've really grown my network, and I could do projects that are in Glasgow, then expanded in Edinburgh and vice versa. So it really expanded what I could do in both for supervision, but also outside of the PhD itself, but connected. So it's been really good.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. And of course, I mean, even if you aren't actually, actual co-supervision will really embed you in those networks. But one of the great things about Glasgow, we'll maybe come on to talk about that in a bit. There are lots of questions in the chat. But one of the great things about Glasgow is that there are 3 universities in Glasgow. Then there's Edinburgh, that's 45 minutes away. There's other universities very nearby, and there's a real sense of the Scottish universities, a kind of sharing of knowledge and experience, and extending those networks. From where we are, we're well geographically placed to do that within Scotland. I've seen a question from Alexei. Thanks for your question. wanting to know if it's a requirement to work as a teaching assistant, how many hours you did, and whether you taught undergrad or postgrad. I'm guessing Jessica and Giuseppe, you've both had experience of this. So who wants to pick up that first? Giuseppe, do you want to go, and then Jessica to talk a bit about that experience?
I can. Just because I'm more GTA than I have GTA karate teaching assistant. I don't think you, as a first, you don't have to do it. It's not required unless it is specified by your funding body, which mine, for example, did not. And I did it only for my third year of PhD, so last year and this year, so only done 2 years of GTA. And for each school has a different structure, I think, on how many hours a GTA can do. I did the first year I only taught one class, so that was 6 hours of teaching, and then the connected marking and preparation, which comes up probably around 20 hours or so, 27 I think by contract. And this year I've done 2 classes, which is a bit more. So it's not required. It was definitely a very useful experience because you really get to read and study a bit beyond your own PhD. It can be when you do a doctorate, you can be very focused on your work and you only read stuff around your topic. But of course, when you teach an undergraduate course, you really need to expand your perspective to very multiple topics and be able to speak about them intelligently to students. Indeed, you need to teach that to students. So in that sense, it was good to take a step back from my PhD, expand my horizons, and especially the first year when it was only one class, I taught one tutorial. It wasn't a great strain on my time. I can imagine if you take 4 or 5 classes, maybe Jessica can speak to that, it can be more intense. But my experience was a very useful step back, learning about different parts of history maybe I didn't remember from my own courses.
Brilliant. Great. Yeah, that's right. So before I hand over to Jessica, so that's exactly it. So there isn't a requirement, and in fact, what you would do is that we offer the opportunity to everyone to apply. So everybody who's a PhD student will apply, and all the applications go through the subject area, of course, because they manage the workload, they know what needs to be taught. And then it's, as Giuseppe said, it's managed at subject level so that PGR students aren't overloaded with the teaching that they do, and it matches as far as is possible the area of their interest and expertise, but certainly stretches people into new areas. Jessica, do you want to pick up with your experience here?
Yep. So I have taught as a GTA in the history department for around 5 years, I believe. And as Giuseppe said, there is kind of a requirement depending on each subject. I think for the history department, you have to be a second year student in order to start teaching. And it's usually one class as well, but this term I've taught 3, so that is much bigger load. But because I was so close to my submission, it was easier to manage because I didn't have all those research responsibilities. I had more like editing responsibilities to do. And this was also kind of a introduction to another avenue of GTA work. And this year I actually became a graduate teaching assistant for student learning development. So, and in that department, I am looking forward to creating my own short course over the summer. So I've been really fortunate that history has given me this opportunity that furthered my teaching career within the university.
Great.
Brilliant. And that's one of the things, of course, about the teaching side of it is the skills development that you get. Obviously, pedagogical skills, but and all the other kind of communication skills and often team working skills, because you're often working in a team with other tutors. So that there's a lot to be gained there. So I hope that helps to answer your question, Alexei. It's almost exclusively undergraduate students. Sometimes when people are close to the end of their PhD, they might do a guest session with master's students, but it's less frequent.
And can I say one last thing is as a PGR, you also get desk space as well. So, and it is shared desk space. So a couple minutes ago, you saw me talking to a colleague who just walked in. I apologize for any interruptions, but it's been really useful for both research, but also once you get into the teaching side of it, you have marking to do, and it gives you a safe space and a quiet place usually to work with. And also it's nice having colleagues because you can bounce ideas off of each other, whether it's research or for coursework stuff that you're teaching on.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Jessica. So I'll be honest and say that we aren't at the moment in the college able to guarantee everyone their own dedicated desk as a PGR student in the college, but there are plenty of open access PGR, dedicated PGR spaces in the library. We have a space just for PGR students in the space down the road here called the Alexander Stone Building. In the new Advanced Research Centre, there are dedicated PGR spaces, and lots of subject areas as well have their own dedicated PGR spaces. So we do our very best to make sure that all PGR students have the opportunity to have, as Jessica said, a space where not only can you study and concentrate, but also have that interaction with your peers, which is really important when you're studying a PhD that can be a slightly solitary experience.
Yeah. For interest, may I
Yeah.
just a quick thought
Yes,
on
of
the
course.
connection, because I clearly work from home, and I realized that for a while I didn't really have the interaction with PGRs, but since the pandemic, well, obviously since the pandemic, but even a bit after, I got into a bit of like having a friend on call, and maybe helpful as a connection for any prospective PGRs to try to maintain escape the solitary confinement you're in, and reach out to some other friends, and maybe also want some companionship while working. And it's been quite useful. So even if I work from home, I was able to set up that similar experience of having someone to bounce ideas off, even though it's on a Zoom call rather than on in person.
Yeah, excellent. I think that's really, I mean, we've obviously got more and more used to working in that way now, but ways of forming that community and those connections are really important. I've seen there are a few questions in the chat that are on similar topics, so I'm going to rattle through a couple of those if I may, because we've got lots of questions coming in, which is really great. So you'll forgive me if I'm mispronouncing any of these, but Saloni and Sky Valley are asking about what happens if you're doing so both of them have got a master's on, first is an MRes and then is a master's in information management and preservation, and both are asking about converting to or rolling into a PhD. The master's programs and the PhD programs at Glasgow are completely separate. So you applied for the master's, you'll be on the master's program. If you want to continue immediately after the master's to do a PhD, you'll be needing to apply for the PhD program while you're on program with the master. So it's unlike at some other institutions where there's a kind of conversion moment or a kind of interview, a process where you convert. The master's and the PhD are separate programs. Now, of course, as you've heard, many of our students do a master's, and while on program, no, they want to carry on and do a PhD, apply for the PhD, get that set up. So that's completely standard. So I don't think you need to, so Sky Valley is asking you don't need to declare your intention to complete a PhD, but just do make that part of the conversation while you're here, start those conversations about application, and then you can apply as appropriate through your through the course of your master's program. But there is a point here about timing, which is also relevant to a number of questions I've got about funding. So Valentina is asking about PhD funding. Again, Saloni is asking about funding. Yes, and Harland is asking about funding. So this is the kind of, how cards on the table, honest time. Most of our PhD students self-fund. There is very little UK funding for PhDs. About maybe 25% of our students are funded. The main funding body is SAGSA, as I've mentioned. SAGSA fund this year will be funding around 50 PhD students for all universities in all arts and humanities subjects in all of Scotland. So that's 11 universities, all humanities subjects in all of Scotland. So that's the hard stuff. So, but it's important I think it's important ethically for us to be very clear about that. If you do want to apply for SAGSA funding, the threshold is obviously high. And the other thing is that the process starts very early. So, for example, if you're starting a master's in this September, October, you would need to start applying for your PhD and the funding in the November. The deadline's probably in December. So you need to be quite ready with the PhD project. It's just the nature, and all of the kind of funding bodies across the UK operate in a similar way. If you're lucky enough to get funding, then the SAGSA funding, for example, covers your fees and a stipend, so you get paid. It's not, it's not a super salary, but it's a living stipend, a living amount to live on. There are a handful of college scholarships. They vary from year to year and they cover your fees, again, fees and a stipend. Then it's really a question of digging down to other, sometimes subjects have small pots of money which will maybe fund a scholarship every few years. We have a scholarship scheme that's been running for a couple of years, which we're hoping will be continued, called the James McCune Smith Scholarship. And that's specifically for Black British students, because that's a cohort that's significantly underrepresented in the college. And so that's again for a few students there. There's a fund, the Carnegie Fund, for students who have an undergraduate degree from a Scottish university, and there's the China Scholarship Fund for students who are of that national background. We do have a web page. In fact, my colleagues may well have already put it up, but maybe they'll put it up again. A web page where you can find scholarship information on scholarships. There we go. And see if there's anything that's relevant to you. But it's really important, I think, for us to be clear about the funding picture, and it is challenging. So, for example, a significant minority, it is a minority, but a significant minority of our students study part-time so that they can also work to support themselves. So if you were thinking of part-time study, you would be in excellent company with many people who study part-time. It's far from being an unusual choice to make. I don't know if either Giuseppe or Jessica wanted to come in on any of these things we've been talking about just now.
I mean, I did eventually go through SACSA, and indeed it is, besides being very competitive, as you say, absolutely true. I know many friends that, probably better application than mine, but different years and different times. It's a matter of luck, really, to get the ultimate funding. But also, as you're saying, you really need to start thinking about it probably in the summer. I started planning my application before I started my master's.
Yeah.
So I finished my undergraduate. Over the summer, I was thinking about, okay, what's my project? What does it look like? I was talking to my supervisor about it. And then in October, November, really, I was focusing much more on, maybe don't tell it to, well, it's fine. I finished my master's now. I was focusing more on my application than on the master's itself for those couple of months of, late October, November, going through many revisions of the draft. So it is a very involved process. And many people wait a year after a master, like finish a master, then apply after it, because it gives them a bit more breathing room, which is maybe a wise thing to do. But yeah, and the unfortunate part is that even if you put all the effort in the world and you do a really, really good job, you just may not get it. Yeah. And that can be very soul crushing.
Yeah. And I can speak from experience. I mean, I sit on the panel that makes final decisions, and there are wonderful, wonderful applications. I mean, dozens of them that don't get funded. It's simply the funding picture we're in.
I was going to say, I'm self-funded, but I have colleagues who maybe they didn't get funding the first year, and then they applied the second year and they got funding. So it is, as Giuseppe said, it is about luck. But it is possible, so don't be discouraged if maybe you don't get it the first year. Do try again. Continue to try as much as possible as the requirements allow you to.
Yeah, exactly. If at first you don't succeed, and you've already put the work into writing the application, so
often it's much better as well the second time around, because
you're already in it and you already know what you're kind of exactly.
And there are grants and stuff for like travel from the college, from the graduate school, from the College of Arts. So I mean, that is also an option too. So if you're going to a conference, you can apply for that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. That's a really important point, actually. So if you need to do archival work, if you need to, if you're traveling to present at a conference, then some subject area will have money, or we in the graduate school have funds to pay for that. So you're not left completely carrying every expense. Giuseppe, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I just want to say that, as people in SACSA always remind us, even if you don't get the funding, there are many other supports that SACSA itself does for all PhD students, because this is scattered, whatever. It's for all PhD students and not just for those funded.
Yeah.
And indeed, there is a lot of stuff that happens at SACSA, like the summer school, the spring into. There are many like training opportunities that you can get even without being funded, and indeed they encourage everybody to. Yeah. It's free, just go.
Yeah, that's a really important point. Thank you for mentioning it. And I've increasingly wanted to talk about SACSA really as a body that provides training. So that is exactly as Giuseppe says, a key part of what they do is training for anyone who is a PGR student in the Arts and Humanities in Scotland. regardless of how you're funded, and all kinds of really interesting skills training, research development training, subject specific or interdisciplinary, and another example of something where you can meet other people across different institutions and get to know them and spread your networks that way. There were a couple of questions about contacting a supervisor. So Lisa's asking, how much time does it usually take from making first contact with a potential supervisor to submitting a formal PhD application? And then Lisa asking, when first contacting a supervisor, would it be better to email them with a very detailed or finished research project or with an overview or short summary? My perspective, so these guys both had the benefit of already being in the system and already having that contact with their master supervisor. So my perspective, both as dean and also as somebody who obviously supervises PhD students, is it's a good approach to a PhD supervisor is an email with a research proposal of between 1 and 2 pages. Maybe slightly, around maybe 2 pages, and a CV and a covering letter explaining what the context of your proposal. So you don't need to have a very extensive research proposal, but it does need to be pretty detailed, because your supervisor needs to understand both understands enough about the project to know that they're a good match, but also to be confident that you have got a sense of what a PhD is and the scope of it. And nobody expects you to, know exactly what you're going to say and how it's going to pan out, but to have that starting position of a kind of mutual understanding of what a PhD project might look like. In terms of how much time it takes to submitting a PhD application, well, it's a little bit how long is a piece of string. There might be a situation where you email me on Monday, I like the look of it, and I say I like the look of it. I might even offer a little bit of feedback, and I suggest a colleague who might be interested, and maybe by the end of the week, you, the potential applicant, and I and my co-supervisor have had a quick chat for 20 minutes to just get a sense of your project and whether it be a good fit. And if we've done that by the end of the week, you could put your application in. It could just take days. It's likely to take longer because people are likely, frankly, to not have the time to do quite that quick turnaround. So I'd ensure you have at least a few weeks, because it's really important that you do have a supervisor who said, yep, when this application formally comes through, I'll have seen it, and I've said yes, this is something that's going to fit with my supervisory load, with my expertise. So I definitely give it as long as you can, but a few weeks at a minimum, I think would be safe. Yeah.
A small thought.
Yeah, sure.
From my experience back in 2019, applying for a PhD itself, the application part was very straightforward. The important part was, as Brian was saying, the communication with supervisors to be very clear what we want to do, what the project is. And once you agree with a supervisor, correct me if I'm not wrong, but the application itself, the PhD, is not much of an hurdle at all. It just You already have the supervisory approval.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Exactly. So you've pretty much got the documentation together. The application is, you need to get references together. That's the thing that can be sometimes be a bit of a challenge. But yeah, you're exactly so.
Can I just squeeze in and say something? So I had saw in the questions that there was a question about starting in January. And so from my experience, because I went from early modern history to medieval history, I actually took the fall off to kind of discuss with my potential supervisor projects, what I was interested in, and then I started in January. So yes, it is possible to start in January, and it can also give you, if that's something you're interested in, it can give you the little time, like myself, to come up with research projects, do some reading, and really become more knowledgeable in the subject area that I was going to pursue for my PhD.
That's a really good point, Jessica. Thanks. Yeah. So you can start in January, and we make sure that there's some induction sessions. I mean, most people start in October, so the majority of the induction stuff is going to happen in October. But yeah, that's a really good point. I'm just seeing some more questions coming in from Fiona, who's thinking about PhD. And now, remote PhD. Are many PhD candidates supervised remotely? So the situation is we don't have a formal distance learning program. So we don't have a kind of identified, you are on a distance learning program, but we recognize that a lot of students, and particularly post-COVID, we can supervise students remotely. What's crucial there is, again, communication with your supervisors about whether they're willing to do that. We have tried to make as much available online as possible now in terms of training and so on. So all the compulsory training happens online, but inevitably, and because we don't have a formal distance learning program, there will be events that will be increasingly happening in person that if you're not based in Glasgow, you might not be able to attend. So it's just important to calibrate kind of expectations around that. It is, of course, nice if you would like to come up and visit people in Glasgow, and quite often if you're a remote student, you might come up for a week so you can meet your supervisors and so on. It is true that SAGSA still have a residency requirement that you live within commuting distance of your primary institution. Other smaller funding routes, honestly, Fiona, I couldn't tell you in the details because they'll have their own regulations. I imagine Carnegie might have a residency requirement, but I couldn't tell you for sure. So the James McKean Smith, for example, we haven't made a residency requirement. It varies. It's really worth just the only thing I can really recommend, because it depends very much on your own personal circumstances and so on, is to have a look at the funding opportunities. I'm going to knock off a couple more questions, and then I've seen that Alexi's got a question for Jessica and Giuseppe. So Dando has asked if it's possible to do a PhD straight from undergraduate. Almost never heard of, I'm afraid, Dando, in Glasgow, in most UK universities. It's almost always required that you have a master's. I'm trying to think about instances where you might be accepted straight into a PhD program. I honestly would struggle to think of one. Perhaps if you were in a practice-based subject where you had 20 years of experience as the internationally renowned theatre director and research and equivalent experience to a master's, but we need, the expectation when you start a PhD is that you have the research skills that have begun at postgraduate level that are match a master's level work. So that's why we really
actually met someone last week.
Did you?
Yeah.
Interesting. And what was their background?
It's a colleague in student learning development. He's a GTA, but they're computer science.
Interesting.
So
okay.
I have a feeling that it's tied to their
Yes.
funding, and they said it was a really rigorous process. So as far, like Bryony said, I've never heard of it for the College of Arts. But for maybe computer science, engineering, I think that is a possibility. Each school has its own requirements.
Yeah. Thanks, Jessica. How interesting. Exactly.
Yeah.
So
I learned something new.
Maybe it's worth mentioning, at least from the SAGS application, as you were saying, Bryony, if probably a practice-based research, they do allow for a year of the experience. So that's a formal part, a possible formal path in the SAGS application as well.
Exactly. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Thanks very much. That's really important. And then the last thing I'm quickly going to mention before handing over to Jessica and Giuseppe for Alexi's question. Villanois is asking, regarding the supervisor, is it better to contact the dean first or directly to the professor with a specific interest? Definitely the professor with a specific interest. I will just say, thanks for your interest. Please, it's absolutely about those first conversations with. You want to enthuse a potential supervisor who goes, wow, I really want this student to come here, because then the admissions process is smooth. Is you've already got someone who's behind your project. 100% identify the supervisor first. Okay, Jessica and Giuseppe, Alexi's asking about requirements related to writing a PhD thesis. How much has to be written before the end of your first year? Jessica, do you want to kick off with that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So each subject has its own requirements for the annual progress review. So for history, as we'll use that as a case sample, the first year they do presentations, and they also do a literature review, which is roughly 6,000 words. And then every year after that, your assignment would be 10,000 words. And then while you get to your third year, you go do your progress review, and they will say, okay, you're ready for thesis pending. And that is whenever you get to do your final writing up stage and being able to also go through that editing stage. So it kind of varies by subject, but it's very reasonable done, I would say. And your supervisors are very supportive, and they've done the process before, so they know what to expect when you're going through it.
Yeah, great. Is that similar to your experience, Giuseppe?
Absolutely, yeah. Probably it's worth saying that the first APR, annual progress review, which when you're in first year, you start in September if you do, and then you have your APR, annual progress review in April. So it's like 7 months, and as Jessica was saying, is a literature review. That's probably the toughest one, at least my experience, because it's kind of a new field and you're really discovering what's happening, and getting your feet in is only is a short amount of time. By the time you get to your second year, you've done already so much work and research that it's quite likely that those 10,000 words will kind of be part and parcel of your already writing. The process you're already writing. And that's even more true for the third year. To be honest, my third year was like, hey, there's a chapter.
That's a dream. That's what we're definitely after. That's exactly. Yes, Jessica.
I was going to say the one thing I've learned about writing up in the last stage is no matter what subject I've talked to who's come from the College of Arts, it seems to be a trend that everyone's writing their conclusion within like the last couple of weeks. So that's not to scare anyone, but it just goes to show that everyone has some similar experiences, which is really nice to be able to share those experiences.
And redrafting their introduction. I mean, that's the story, isn't it? The introduction is often the last thing, because you're like, okay, now I know what I'm going to say, so I need to go back to the introduction and tell people what I'm actually going to say. So Lexi's asking about how much has to be written. In the formal process that Giuseppe and Jessica have described, the annual progress review, which is the check-in with your supervisors and with another member of staff as well, an external reviewer who will give further feedback, which people found very valuable. The actual number of words that you're asked to share is, again, varies from subject to subject, but 6, 7, maybe up to 10,000 words at the end of each year. By the time you reach your second annual progress review, so when you're close to halfway through the third year, the 3-year process, if that's what you're aiming for, supervisors are asked to confirm that you've written, in my subject, 20,000 words. So while people aren't going to asked to read that, it's not formally looked at, there's an increasing number of words that supervisors are asked to confirm, okay, there's a thesis here, it's coming. And then, as Jessica says, by the end of the third year, if you haven't submitted, and very few people submit in 3 years, very few. So most people move into what we call the thesis pending year, sometimes might be called the writing up year. Then the supervisors have to say, it's not finished, but there's there are tens of thousands of words here, and it will eventually become between 80 and 100,000 words of thesis. But of course, people's process are different, and some people plan and plan and plan and plan and plan, and then the actual words come out at a later stage in the process. Other people are writing a lot as they go along, and we try to be flexible to account for that. But it is important that we have those annual progress reviews in place to make sure that we can support people, that they are moving towards completing the PhD.
Yeah, and indeed, the support is also about your supervisor relationship. That's often always a question asked every year. Is like, how often do you meet him or her? Or you didn't meet them? How is it being helpful? It's something that you some problems with them, so that if there are problems, which may happen, there is an avenue for those to air out, and you get support outside from the supervisory relationship.
Yeah.
And I would like to say one thing is, I know Bryony kind of talked about some students do part-time as well. There is the option, let's first say something has happened and you're full-time or you're part-time, you can always apply to the graduate school to go either or. So for me, I started off as full-time, but I ended up needing to go part-time for specific reasons. And the graduate school was really accommodating in that sense, being able to help me. And it gave me a little bit of extra time to finish writing, which was really, really useful, especially during COVID lockdowns that we all had to go through.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Thanks, Jessica. We do want to be as flexible as possible to enable people to finish the PhD. Like that's what we're here to do. There's a couple of questions that maybe I'll address here. Saloni is asking whether the Masters in Research enhances the chances to get into the PhD. Mentioned that the MRes gives us training for research to apply for a PhD, and also is it relevant in other parts of the UK or outside the UK? So I'm not going to be able to speak really much to the question about outside the UK. Certainly, an MRes is recognised across all UK institutions as a master's qualification. The benefit of doing a master's by research as against a taught master's is that it does have that more extended research component. So often that may place you on a better footing, arguably, to then already have started developing a PhD project, which is likely to be related to it. So yes, I mean the short answer is there are going to be benefits. There may be benefits to doing an MRes if you want to move into a PhD. Having said that, the majority, again, the significant majority of our students have done a taught master's with a dissertation at the end of 15,000 words, and that is absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. So it really depends on how you want to use that master's year, where you are with your project, whether you feel like you want more taught components or whether you're ready to really start writing a longer dissertation. So if you're doing or plan to do a taught master's, don't feel you're at a disadvantage in any way. It's very much about where you are with your research. And while we're talking about taught elements, Fiona's asked if there are taught components. Well, so there are no, when you apply for the PhD program, you accept the PhD program and you've paid your fees for the PhD program, what that pays for is PhD supervision and the training that goes with it. We can't guarantee that there'll be any taught elements because postgraduate taught students or undergraduate students need to take priority. Having said that, very, very many of our PGR students do take courses in, specific things as you've described, and their supervisors are often very well placed to facilitate that because often they convene the relevant courses, for example. So it's quite an important, it's a bit of a balancing act. It's really important that we make it clear that you can't be guaranteed a place on those courses that are designed for undergraduate and postgrad, but in most cases, it's again about open conversation with your supervisor. Courses like that are available. I don't know if Giuseppe or Jessica, if you have had any experience of taking those.
Yeah, I have actually, because I needed some statistical knowledge for my thesis, and so I contacted the School of Maths of all schools, and
Wow.
they gave me access to their year one Moodle, and I mean I could have joined the classes if I wanted to, which didn't really want to, but I could use the resources that a statistics student in first year had as much as anybody else, and that was very helpful because they gave me a background knowledge that I could use for my thesis. And the process was simple. I just emailed the relevant convener, relevant professor, and they were very happy to put me in the Moodle.
Great. That's really good. And it just goes to show, I mean, the more resources are available electronically, that it's not really, that it doesn't involve more input resource from if you're able to self-study and to work your way through the material. Absolutely. Jessica, did you have any?
So I didn't have to do anything specific, but I will kind of add, this maybe be a good opportunity to add on that the Graduate School in Research and Innovation offers different kinds of workshops, from writing an abstract to building reputation as a researcher, getting the job you want in arts, also how to write a literature review. So there's a wide net. The Research and Innovation also offers a postgraduate leadership program. So there's a lot of different kinds of learning possibilities that they're not continuous. Some of them are like one-day events, whereas like the postgraduate leadership program went over 3 months. So it was really nice to be able to meet other PGRs within my different subjects, but within the College of Arts or even outside, maybe in social sciences. So I found it really, really, I tried personally to enroll in as much as possible.
Yeah. Thanks, Jessica. That's that's really great that you've brought that up. And it's so, yes, the training, what you absolutely are entitled to and is designed for you as a postgraduate research student is a range of training that we offer at college level. So just for us humanities students. And then we've got the link on the screen now from research and development across the university. And it's everything from managing perfectionism, which is immediately oversubscribed because every PhD student is a perfectionist, or other well-being and work-life balance things, or maybe there's specific training statistical things you need, or there are things about presentation skills which are very important, or developing collaborative, all a really wide range of skills to support your research and also to support what your aspirations are post-PhD. Because people are thinking about a wide range of destinations post PhD. Yes, maybe academic, but maybe other kinds of destinations. So that's the aim of those programs, is to really give you a broad range of skills in those areas. I'd really like actually to ask Jessica a little bit about what she's planning to do post PhD, but I'm going to just quickly note Valentina's question about the deadline. In principle, it's open the whole year. We in the College of Arts don't operate a deadline system because, for example, if you were to think about a January start, then you could apply in the autumn beforehand. I would say, however, that if you want to, given that our starts are in October and January, you do need to give it, I'd say, a number of months in advance, particularly if you are going to need to apply for a visa. That can take, as I'm afraid you probably know, and sadly, particularly as the current political state of things, post-Brexit, for many people, makes it even harder. So it can take a long time. So we would strongly suggest that if you're planning to apply for a PhD and you will have to apply for a visa, that you do so by, I'd say, July for an October start at the latest. The sooner you can do it, the better. Obviously, it will take a bit of time setting up conversations with your supervisors and so on, but we strongly suggest that you do that. If you're not looking, if you're not going to need to go through the visa process, I'd still recommend August, around sometime in August, for an application, because your supervisor will need a bit of lead time to know whether they've got capacity to supervise in the next couple of months. So I hope that's helpful. Why don't I ask a bit about, because both of our students are towards reaching the end of the PhD process. So Jessica, do you want to say a bit about what you're up to now, what you're going to be doing with your PhD and the many wonderful skills you've learned on it?
Yep. So as I mentioned, I did the postgraduate leadership program last year, and one of the reasons why I took that course was because I had entrepreneur goals. And so right before I submitted my thesis, I applied for a startup visa, which was endorsed by the university. And this month, I am launching a nonprofit business. And because I was a student and also an alumni member, the student enterprise within the University of Glasgow, they have office space. It's communal office space, so it's shared. But it's an advanced research center. And so I just recently got new space in there, which is exciting. But they also offer summer programs. So different kinds of workshops focused specifically on how to build your own business. And they also offer mentoring, and they offer applications for grants. So my endeavor is going the entrepreneur route, which is both exciting and terrifying at the same time. But I am actually really excited because I think the one thing as doing a PhD is I've learned how to do a project, but also working with different people within the university. And so I'm transferring those skills now into my own business and hopefully becoming a great leader.
It's very exciting, and I think it's, again, as I say, many people doing a PhD will aspire to work in academia, but it's going to be, the stats are that it sits around 50%, maybe not quite as many. So and of course, a PhD is really, really valued by employers, or you can create your own business, as Jessica is planning to. Giuseppe, it's a horrible question to ask when you still haven't quite yet submitted, but what are your current thoughts about post-PhD life?
No, it is a scary question, but it's a very important one, which I've thought about a lot, as you can imagine, given that I'm a couple of months away. So I'm still undecided, of course, because first I really want to finish and I'm going to look deeply. But I know that while I would love to remain in the academic circles, and I will probably try, I know it's quite hard, actually. It's quite hard mostly because, they're not, the opportunities are not that many. So, it's very competitive, let's say. Having said that, I also know I've learned a lot in doing my PhD. As I was mentioned before, I've done lots of mathematical thinking, and I learned coding as part of my doctorate, and, done lots of data analysis of all those kinds. So I'm really excited to expand my horizons to other types of jobs, like, data analyst or software engineer, for which as an history PhD, I've learned actually a lot about. And I realized, looking at job offers on the internet, that the skills I've learned could really help get into such a wide range of jobs, including, a software engineer, perhaps. So that's what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about, unless I find something really good in a university, which I will look for, I'm happy to use what I've learned in this last 4 years to step outside.
That's so interesting, and it just goes to show what skills you can develop. Medieval history, or people will think it's so neat. So niche, but as you say, to have acquired those skills that might enable you to move into software engineering, it's fascinating. My little anecdote is that I finished my PhD quite a few years ago now, and by the end of it was, of course, heartily sick of it, like any normal person would be, and didn't want to ever think about it again. So I made a series of thought I might become a lawyer, and obviously that decided that was a bad idea anyway, and I ended up with a PhD in experimental early 20th century women's writing, working for the National Audit Office, which is the body which audits the government, UK government. Not, you would have thought, an obvious fit, but again, the skills that I had of research, of attention to detail, of careful use of language, of project management were all valued by the National Audit Office. And there I was, worked for 15 months there. And then anyway, another story I'll tell you about if you come to join us at Glasgow, but I've decided I might try to work my way back into academia, and that worked out for me. But yeah, it's really important to emphasize that. We've got about 10 minutes left. I'm going to briefly mention, and Ron's got a question about training for doctoral studies and doctoral students in film studies, and they've been helpfully directed specifically to the Film and TV Studies website. Again, it's really important to know that there are compulsory courses in across areas like research ethics, inclusion, diversity, equality, diversity and inclusion, data management, and then there's an induction course. But this isn't a PhD program, as there are in some other institutions and in other countries, which has a taught element as such. So unlike, for example, PhD programs in some North American universities where you have the taught bit and then you move to dissertation, it isn't like that here. You begin on your research dissertation from the beginning. So there is training, there's training obviously provided, but it's from the beginning you're in the research element. I do want to give us a chance in the last few minutes to talk about Glasgow and what it's like to live in as a city. So none of us are Glasgow natives. We all came here and have stayed. It is, so I've moved here 16, 17 years ago. And, let's get the weather out the way first, okay? It's not great. Let's just be clear. It's not great. So we'll accept that. And what it means is when the weather is beautiful and sunny and it's warm, you're particularly delighted. But it is such a warm and welcoming city, is the number one the cliche that is true, or the phrase that Glasgow has of itself, its slogan is "People make Glasgow," and I really think that's the case. And I couldn't believe it when I moved here, how kind of welcoming and friendly and helpful people are. It's an extremely exciting city in terms of music and culture and arts. And hey, you look, friendliest and second most affordable in the world. It's not just us saying it. Jessica, Giuseppe, do you want to say a little bit about your Glasgow experience?
Cool.
I'll let you go first. Okay.
So, well, okay. I've been here for 9 years almost. No, yes, 9 years. So I've had quite a bit of Glasgow experience, and I mean, what I've really enjoyed about, I guess, really people make Glasgow because why I stayed is ultimately the connection I've made in the university and outside of it. And there's a lot of opportunities for that. So I guess, yeah, I'm reflecting. Indeed, that's why I stayed, and that's why I love it so much, because I know so many people here now, and it was so possible, so easy. It was definitely possible in 2 or 3 years to start forming really strong friendships.
Yeah.
And in a very welcoming, friendly city, that's not necessarily the case everywhere. So that's probably my main thought. That I like Glasgow for people that are in it right now.
Yeah, great. Jessica.
Yep. So before we met today, Giuseppe and I found out that we moved here the same month and the same year. So that was really exciting. So I've been here almost 9 years as well. And I actually came with my spouse. He did his PhD in medieval history and his master's in classics. So that was the only person I knew in Glasgow when we arrived. And we had never actually traveled here to see the city. So it was a very, not culture shock, but it was very unexpected. But overall, like, we've had so many friends that have become family now. We try to do holidays together. You can walk down Byers Road and I'll see someone I know. I know we keep saying this, Glasgow, people make Glasgow, like, it is a really friendly city and people really will help you. Like, so if you get lost or something, you can just ask someone and sometimes they'll even take you, which is really nice.
Yeah.
I think I had that happen in the beginning, kind of disoriented on my way, but overall, like, I love Glasgow. There's always something to do. There's free events going on. There's Glasgow Botanics. There's also the Kelvin Grove Park, the museums. So, and then there's also like short distances, so you can go to historical sites and just get on the train. And I think Stirling is less than a 20-minute ride. So if you want to go to like Stirling Castle, William Wallace Monument, so there's plenty of things to do and see that's accessible by public transportation.
Yeah.
I think that's one emphasize that I was thinking about. I was talking like you can really walk to places. At least I've always lived in the city, but even I have friends that lived a bit further outside, and they just they would live in Annisland, right? It was 10, 20 minutes walking down where the main road, and it's a very pleasant walk in a shaded tree. So if you live in the city, you really can get many places. There is a very convenient subway system. I mean, it's one line, and it's hard to get lost in it. But nonetheless, it really connects many places. And I walk throughout the city to generally walk places.
Yeah.
And that's a positive Glasgow. It's a big city. There are many different parts, but it's not gigantic. Right?
Yeah.
We're not talking about London. We're not talking about Rome or Milan or Paris. You can really actually walk to place and get familiar with many parts of it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a very human-sized city, it seems to be, and also extremely beautiful, which people often, people talk about Edinburgh. Well, yeah, I mean, sure, but Glasgow is an incredibly beautiful. I mean, the university is, of course, very beautiful, but other parts of Glasgow, and another nickname for Glasgow is a dear green place because of how many parks we have here. In addition to which, I've been reminded by my colleagues putting this in the chat that Scotland was voted the most beautiful country in the world, and if you get on a train in Glasgow, you can be in that incredibly beautiful countryside in an hour, couple of hours. You're out in the Highlands, you're walking in just the most stunning scenery. So even if you're not a full kind of city person, an urbanite, we're really well placed. Dando is saying the subway is the easiest in the world to navigate to. So the joke goes that Glaswegians call it the Clockwork Orange because it's literally two circles. One goes that way and one goes that way. And the colours of the subway livery is orange. Honestly, I've never heard a Glaswegian ever refer to it as a Clockwork Orange. I think it was maybe a marketing thing, but however, it does describe it. And I think that's another example. Glasgow wants to make it easy for you to get around the city. Okay, we're going to wrap up, I think, very shortly. So, Giuseppe, Jessica, did you want to have a final word before we say goodbye to the people who've been joining us? Jessica, do you?
I kind of just wanted to add on just a little bit thing as you guys are deciding what PH topics you want to do is pick something that you're enthusiastic about and that you know that you want to work on for a long time, especially if something happens, personal reasons, or everyone got to see what happened with COVID. Life happens, but take time also during your research to take for yourself. Like try to go on walks, join the gym, join a hobby. Make time for yourself because PhD is rigorous, but it can be really rewarding at the end, as I am finding out myself.
Fabulous.
Yeah, I wanted to really much say a similar point, interesting, sorry, Bryony, where mental health is really important. And I found myself that if, especially in general, you will struggle because it is a rewarding and beautiful and tough program. And there is so much help out there. Yeah, thank you for the link. And I, in the first year of my PhD, I did a project therapist for a year or so to really help with stress and like managing workloads. And it was really helpful, and it's possible to, overcome difficulties because I would say that it probably happens for everybody that you struggle in your PhD, and it is normal. And it's, there is help out there and you should seek it. And don't just, I know some friends that reached the third year of PhD, like, oh, why did you not getting help? I'm like, you probably should have gotten some help. You're right. It's been tough. So don't ignore your mental health. It's important to take care of it.
Thank you so much. That's both they're fantastic things to end on, and I really appreciate you sharing that, Giuseppe. And it is so important that what drives people through a PhD program, as Jessica said, is the love for their subject, the people they're working with, the networks they're forming. But the reason it's rewarding is that it's a long process. It'll have its ups and downs, and it's absolutely what the institution or the university and the people who work here want to do, is to support you as best we can, to make that a rewarding and fulfilling experience. So I really appreciate you sharing those final thoughts. We're right on 12 o'clock. It's been a pleasure hearing your chats. Thanks so much for your participation, and we really look forward to seeing your applications and hoping to welcome you to the wonderful city of Glasgow and the University of Glasgow College of Arts before long. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining us. Bye.